Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome back. Peter and I were just having a funny moment. Never a dull moment with Peter. Yes, Peter was enjoying some licorice. Not so quietly. Anyways, so we were talking about the children of Israel last week, boys and girls. We talked about two spies who had gone into the city of Jericho. They had spied out the land, the city, talked about how they had escaped. Well, the children of Israel know that this is God's plan. They are supposed to get into the promised land. The problem is they're headed there and there is a huge river in front of them. The Jordan River is in front of them. There weren't bridges. They couldn't cross a bridge, and a boat to get that many people across would have taken a while, and they didn't have a boat, and they swim maybe, but how are you going to carry your tent and everything with you? Boys and girls, do you remember another story we talked about where they came to a body of water and God did something special for the children of Israel? Yeah, if you remember that, you can start thinking about today's story and what miracle God's going to be able to perform. Boys and girls, think for a moment, though, that all of these children of Israel, minus Joshua and Caleb, are not the same children who had left Egypt. Okay, Joshua and Caleb were two of the spies who had told the truth, so they were going to get to go into the promised land. But everybody else at the time that they had spied, if they were 20 years and older, they were going to pass away from the wandering in the wilderness. Well, after the people have wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, they're there. They're at the brink of the river. And they've got to figure out how to get across. Well, boys and girls, God has a plan. God has put Joshua as a leader, and God talks to Joshua. He says, I have a plan for you. And we're in Joshua chapter 3, if you want to look at that. The people prepared to cross the Jordan River. Verse number 1 says, And Joshua rose early in the morning, and they removed from Shittim and came to Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over. Verse number 2, And it came to pass after 3 days that the officers went through the host. Verse 3, And they commanded the people, saying, When ye see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then shall ye remove from your place and go after it. So they moved close to the river, they camped by the river, and then 3 days later, they're like, all right, this is the plan. When you see the ark of the covenant being carried by the Levites, go into the water. That's your cue. You follow them in. Wait, the river is still raging. Okay, boys and girls, I do have a fear of water because I have a fear of drowning. That's not the way I want to go. Okay, but just walk into the river? Like just step in, what? Boys and girls, I can't imagine the faith that took them to do that. Like I said, I have a fear of water and God doesn't work that way today anyways, but I can't imagine what was going through their heads. But God had promised them the promised land, which was on the other side of the river. Well, the priests, verse number 15, it says, And as they that bear the ark were come unto Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, for Jordan overfloweth all his banks all the time of harvest. Boys and girls, this wasn't even the normal river. The river was flooding at this time. It's time of harvest. It is wider than it normally is. We've recently had quite a bit of rain and some basements flooded and some rivers were overflowing and some streets got covered. Can you imagine flood water just stepping into it? That's essentially what the people were doing. Well, those carrying the Ark of the Covenant did just what God had asked. They step into the water. What do you think, boys and girls? What's God going to do with the water? Verse number 16. That the waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon an heap very far from the city Adam, that is beside Zaratan. And those that came down toward the sea of the plain, even the salt sea failed and were cut off. And the people passed over right against Jordan. Verse 17, And the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of Jordan. And all the Israelites passed over on dry ground. until all the people were passed clean over Jordan. Boys and girls, those carrying the Ark of the Covenant, they obeyed. They stepped in the river because that's what they were told to do. And when they did, God parted it. He stopped the water that was running into the river from the streams and the ditches and all the things that flowed into it. He stopped it. He stopped the river and they walked across on dry ground. Well, those who had the Ark of the Covenant, they actually stayed in the middle of the river. Well, all of the Israelites crossed. I was just telling Peter before this, I can't imagine how heavy the Ark of the Covenant must have felt standing there waiting for all the people to cross. Well, the people crossed on dry land, and those with the Ark of the Covenant, the Levites, were still standing there in the middle. And Joshua collects 12 men. He picks one from each of the 12 tribes because God had told him to do that. He didn't just pick random men. He had to get one from each of the tribes. And he said, go back into the river where the Ark of the Covenant is and pick up 12 stones from that firm ground. Well, they picked up 12 stones, boys and girls. They brought those 12 stones back and they built an altar to the Lord. They wanted to remember what God had done for them there crossing the Jordan, how God had provided for them. Boys and girls, God had a way, God had a plan. He made a way for them and He provided, He protected all of them. Not one person or animal drowned that day in the Jordan River. God had protected all of them. Well, after they get the 12 rocks, they bring them out. Then the priests, the Levites, carrying the Ark of the Covenant come out of the river, and the river goes back to normal. Yep, closes right up, goes right back to normal. The water flows as it normally did. Well, they built that altar, boys and girls, so that when they would come back to that place, or when any one of the Israelites would come back and see that memorial, they would remember how great a leader Joshua was, right? I mean, they're going to think about Joshua and all that. No. What? That's right, Peter. They built the altar so that they could remember what God had done for them. Boys and girls, sometimes we keep things or have things that remind us of God's great power. Okay, or we have a life verse or something, a promise that we can go back to that reminds us of how God took care of us. Because we need to remember what God has done for us. We need to think about all that God has done for us. Boys and girls, He woke you up this morning. There's a children's song about how God woke me up this morning. He did. God provided food for you. He provided clothes for you. He provided so many things for us, boys and girls. Just look around your room right now. Look at the device that you're watching. Licorice, that's right, Peter. God provided us our sweet treats too. Look around the room. You're watching this on some form of device. Whether that's mom or dad's or not, God provided it for you. Look at where you're sitting or standing. Look at all that's around you that God has provided for you, boys and girls. Have you thanked Him for that? So often we can complain. I was reminded again with the children of Israel and all their complaining, that the opposite of complaining is thanksgiving, boys and girls. Have you thanked God? What if you wrote down everything around you right now and you thanked God for it? Have you thanked God that you had a nice place to sleep last night? You weren't out in the rain. You weren't out in a storm. Have you thanked God for your parents or your grandparents or whoever takes care of you? Have you thanked God that He gave you breath today? Have you thanked God that you're not in a hospital today or somewhere else, boys and girls? We have so much to thank God for, and we often take it for granted. Boys and girls, I hope you take time to thank God for the physical things He's given, but I also hope you take time to thank God for the salvation that He's provided for you. He died on the cross for your sins and for mine, boys and girls. We commit sins every single day. Try as we might to be perfect, we're not perfect. Try as we might to stop complaining or stop doing this or that, boys and girls. We struggle with our sin nature, but God died for all those sins. Have you thanked God for that? Have you thanked Him for dying on the cross for you? I hope you regularly do, boys and girls. We want to remember what God has done for us. We don't want to forget about it. And we want to thank Him for all that He's done for us. Boys and girls, I hope you'll take time each day this week to thank God for at least 3 things that He's done for you. Have a good week. See you